The beginning was ordinary. In July of 1994, the Brenner family had been driving back from a summer trip to Yellowstone National Park, laughing and tired, ready to head home to Wisconsin. They stopped at a small gas station in Cascade, Montana, to stretch their legs, grab sodas, buy a bag of chips. The teenage daughters snapped photos of each other making silly faces under the flickering neon lights, while their parents unfolded a paper map, arguing amiably over which route would be fastest. It was one of those small, perfectly forgettable family moments that, in hindsight, becomes unbearably precious, because they never made it home. For 6 weeks afterward, people scoured the wilderness. Search dogs traced paths into forests and dead ends. Flyers with smiling faces hung on telephone poles. Their car was eventually located near a remote trailhead. Windows rolled down, keys still in the ignition, the mother's purse on the seat as if she had only stepped out for a moment. But there were no footprints leading away, no blood, no struggle, just nothing. After 3 long months, the local sheriff's office ended the investigation, chalking it up to hikers who had simply gotten lost in unforgiving terrain. It was the kind of answer designed to soothe paperwork, not hearts. Time passed, and official interest faded. But time did not erase the Brenner family, at least not for Tom, Dan Brenner's younger brother. 15 years later, in 2009, the past found him again, unexpected and terrible. A stranger from YouTube, a kid who made mountain biking videos with shaky drone footage, sent him an email. Tom had received many alleged sightings over the years. People swore they saw his brother pumping gas in Alaska, or his sister-in-law camping in Idaho. But time had dulled his hopes. This one was different. It came with a video file. Tom clicked play, not really expecting anything. At first, the drone floated lazily above gray blankets of Montana forest, sweeping over logging roads half overtaken by pine. Then the camera tilted, dipping, and revealed a clearing where no clearing should have been. Dozens of white crosses lay in neat rows, each one sticking out of the earth like broken teeth. His breath caught as the drone operator flew closer. Every cross was tended like a grave. Then movement across the frame. 2 men dragging a tarp-wrapped shape. Practiced hands. They stopped, dug quickly. The taller one suddenly gestured up, noticing the drone. Both bolted into the canopy. Before the video ended, the lens had captured a single fallen cross. Rain had washed away a layer of dirt, revealing scraps of yellow fabric, faded, weathered, but unmistakable. Tom knew that shirt. He'd bought it for his brother Dan at a Packers game. That image tilted Tom's world. He had lived 15 years in limbo, a purgatory of unanswered questions, only to discover his brother's family might not have been lost hikers at all. They had been buried here, carefully, deliberately, with others. 43 rows of graves. Fired up with dread and determination, Tom soon received a call from Granite County Sheriff Wade Collins, requesting his presence. "We have reason to believe this could be connected to your brother's disappearance." From there, Tom's life twisted into a spiral of secrets too relentless to be coincidence. The sheriff confirmed that what the drone showed was real. A mass graveyard hidden in the trees. 43 markers in total. Items already recovered matched the Brenner family. Dan's witch watch, Linda's wedding ring, their daughter's bracelets. The ache that had sat in Tom's chest for a decade cracked open again. But more chilling yet, letters had been left on some graves. Someone had been visiting, tending, even leaving notes of guilt in cryptic initials. That someone turned out to be Jimmy Corwin, a boy who had been their neighbor in 1994 and who had been believed to have run away to California weeks after the Brenner family vanished. But Jimmy hadn't run. He had been forced to help. Now, weathered by 2 decades and terminal illness, Jimmy revealed truths that reframed everything. Earl Duggan, son of the county's revered former sheriff, had long been running an organized pipeline. Families weren't hikers falling prey to misadventure. They were stock. Some were buried in Montana. Others were sold. Jimmy showed Tom and Collins where Dan had discovered a hidden underground holding facility in July of 1994, the day before the family vanished. Cages lined with scratch marks. Desperate words etched by fingernails against rusted metal. "Help us. They took my daughter." Even names. Ashley Brenner, Megan Brenner. The nieces Tom had believed had died instantly had in fact lingered there alive, confined. Dan had tried to save them, breaking back in at night, but had been overwhelmed. For that rebellion, his entire family had been condemned. Shock built upon shock. The graves were only the failed merchandise, victims who resisted, fought, or had no value to be trafficked. Others, the marketable ones, had been transported. Jimmy himself bore evidence, tattooed numbers on his arm, branding like one would mark livestock. Tom's grief and horror hardened into purpose. The scheme stretched not merely through a corrupt family, but through law enforcement, judges, and transport companies. Earl Duggan had outmaneuvered oversight for decades. The older generation had covered everything, and now their successors continued the machinery. What chilled Tom most was the revelation that some victims still lived in captivity, and among them, the real possibility was Megan, his niece. Everything escalated when it was revealed Megan had been trafficked overseas and raised under new identities. She eventually surfaced 15 years later in Singapore, living as Emma, with fragmented memories that had haunted her since girlhood. For years she had been gaslit into believing her American family was a fever dream, fantasies conjured by childhood trauma. It was only when Tom, with live-streamed evidence and millions of online witnesses, brought the truth to light that she began to remember her real name, Megan Brenner. Ashley had not survived. She had fought fiercely at 15, resisting to the point that her captors could not sell her. Their revenge was execution and burial with her parents. But Megan, quiet, subdued by fear and conditioning, had been shipped abroad and raised in disguise. The family's betrayal deepened when evidence surfaced showing Carol, Linda's own sister, had brokered the Brenner family's sale. Jealous, bitter, resentful of her sister's happy family, Carol had contacted Earl, offering details of her sister's route and schedules for money. She signed her sister's death warrant. Payment records proved it, and when confronted, she broke on camera in one of the nation's most memorable televised trials. Tom, Megan, Jimmy, and a growing circle of unlikely allies forced these horrors into daylight. They intercepted live shipments, exposed networks across states, and confronted denials at every level of government. Jimmy died before the conclusion, but not before confessing and giving testimony. Kyle, the young drone pilot and streamer who had sparked the whole chain of discovery, became both accidental journalist and documentarian, recording a movement. Federal agents, stunned by the scale, used the evidence to dismantle pieces of an organization that had exploited forgotten families for 40 years. The graves in Montana were excavated under FBI supervision. 38 sets of remains were identified. 5 graves proved empty, reserved for those trafficked overseas, just like Megan. Families who had lived in uncertainty for decades finally had names, belongings, and grave sites to mourn. Though some villains, like Earl Duggan, would die in custody while claiming impunity, and others like Carol would spend life sentences railing with self-righteous bitterness, justice of some kind was finally carved out. But justice tasted incomplete. For Tom and Megan, survivors of different kinds, the fight had only begun, because their personal story, raw, tragic, intimate, revealed an even greater shadow, that the system Earl represented was not unique. Other Earls existed elsewhere. For Tom, it meant following the echo of his brother's final message. Dan had knowingly walked into danger, saying he had something important to do. That something was resisting a machinery of darkness that swallowed families whole. For Megan, reclaiming her real name meant more than survival. It meant fighting so other daughters, sisters, and parents were not lost into the hungry void. Ashley's bravery, her scratched notes and hidden clues, had guided rescuers and ultimately saved not only her sister but hundreds of others. When at last the Brainer family was reburied together, Dan, Linda, and Ashley, the cemetery filled with survivors and their families who stood in gratitude, grief, and solidarity. Megan placed a note Ashley had written before her death, a stubborn promise that someone would come, that they would not be forgotten. That promise had come true. And, across the clearing where 43 white crosses once concealed silence, headstones were erected instead, each marked by a name. Families wept there. Daughters and sons were no longer written off as runaways or lost hikers. They were acknowledged, remembered, fought for. The Brainer case became not just an ending, but the start of something larger. Tom, Megan, Anna, another survivor from Singapore, and Kyle began patching themselves together into a group, not polished, not official, but relentless. With cyber research, streaming platforms, and bitter determination, they outlined a new, quiet mission to pursue every lead of missing families that fell through official cracks. Because there would always be more, but now there would also be someone looking. As Tom stood in the hushed evening light of Montana, he remembered Dan's voice on that final voicemail. Something important we need to do. At last he understood. That important thing was not only saving their own family, but refusing to let silence swallow others. The graves were no longer just graves. They were reminders, rallying cries, and a promise etched into soil. Megan, scarred but alive, stood beside her uncle with fresh determination. "Every child we find," she said quietly, "is for Ashley." Tom squeezed her shoulder. For Dan. For Ashley. For all of them. And with that they stepped forward, carrying sorrow and fierce resolve in equal measure. The dead finally had peace. The living now had work to do.